The second experiment that we're going to do will actually lead to a third experiment. They're all part of a series. Okay. The second one will basically put the larger consciousness system between a rock and a hard place. We will ask it to do something that, we will put it in a position where it will have to do something that is considered like a miracle, something that shouldn't happen. We'll force it to happen. And exactly what that is that we will set up the experiment such that the experimenter will be able to predict whether a photon coming toward a beam splitter, now a beam splitter is a piece of glass or plastic that when a particle hits it, it has a 50-50 chance of transmitting, going right through it, or reflecting. So it's a piece of plastic like this, and it either bounces off or it goes through. Okay? And it's just a piece of material that does that, and it will always do that. Now the experimenter is going to be able to say, the next photon will transmit, and the next photon will transmit, but the next photon is going to reflect, and they will be able to predict that before it happens. So what makes this a small miracle is that's impossible, because whether it transmits or reflects is an entirely random natural function of that piece of plastic. So how is that possible? You see? Well, that just produces a little bit more evidence that this reality is indeed information-based, which is to say it's a virtual reality, and that consciousness is the computer. Because the reason that consciousness can do that is that the consciousness is looking at the results of a double slit experiment, getting the answer as to whether that was part of an interference pattern or not, and then the system has to make that particle that's headed toward the beam splitter either reflect or not reflect based on what the experimenter saw from his end. So the experimenter sees one fact, forces the larger conscious system, forces reality to produce a result that should be entirely random. Nothing should be able to change that, but indeed the system will change it to transmit or reflect because of what the people see. People get a piece of information that forces the system to change reality to suit that information. So that's what will happen. Now the next one will be similar, except then we're going to introduce a third element, and that is that the particle won't just hit a piece of plastic or glass that reflects or transmits, but rather it will go to a device that is attached to a random number generator that will allow us to determine whether a particle that is radiated, an atomic particle gets radiated from some, let's say, radioactive source. What that means is every so often, if this is a radioactive source, it throws a particle off in some random direction. Well, we will put a Geiger counter around this half and another Geiger counter around this half, so that if the particle comes out through this side, let's say that'll be a 1. If it goes out through this side, that will be a 0. So now, we will let the experimenter predict whether the next particle that comes off of this radioactive source will produce a 1 or a 0. In other words, we can predict the side that it will shoot the particle, which is another completely natural, random function that physics would say nobody can control. It just is what it is. But again, we will see that the experimenter, depending on what the experimenter knows, the reality will have to change to suit that. So what we do is end up putting more evidence that this is a virtual reality, information-based. And because the consciousness is the one that's forcing the system to modify a natural function then it also says that consciousness is the computer. So it does both of those. So those are the next two experiments. They're similar, they're just done a little differently. And we think they will work like that will work. And they've never been done before. So this is entirely brand new physics experiment that's never been attempted before. Unfortunately, it's expensive. The reason it is expensive is that the one part that will allow the experimenter to know whether that particle going through the double slit is going through is going through an interference pattern or a particle pattern, it's like a camera is what they call it, but basically it's a device about this big around, and when a particle hits it, when a photon hits it, it outputs the position, X and Y, where it hits, and T, the time that it hits. So you get those three pieces of information every time a particle hits it. All the other detectors that we've had are just, they can tell you if a particle hits it, period. But this tells you X and Y, where it hits it, and exactly when it hits it. Very expensive, costs about $150,000 just for that one piece of equipment. So it's very expensive. That cost a little more than the whole experiment we did for experiment 1. And experiment 1 was basically to test the kind of an argument between me and traditional physics, whether or not the observation, human observation, or the involvement of consciousness was really an integral part of the double slit and how that comes out. And as it turns out, I was right. It works the way I said it would work. The physicists who disagreed with me have kind of created a very unsubstantiated addition to entanglement that allows them to kind of excuse themselves from the result, but it's still evidence. We're building up, these series of experiments will build up a progressive case of evidence that there's more than one way to look at the results of physics. Yes, you can use this, what I would say is an absurd application of entanglement to get the problem right, to get the right answer. But there's another way that isn't absurd, that's just perfectly logical and natural and gives you the same answer. So the physicists will always, I think, be able to come up with some story that will explain their point, but they have to stretch pretty far to get one, and mine is very simple and straightforward. So it just adds weight to the idea that this is a virtual reality computed by consciousness.
And how does this help humanity, Tom?
Well, it helps humanity immensely. I don't know if you've seen the breakthrough video, but if you look at the breakthrough video I put out, you will see that from a viewpoint of materialism, there's an ethic that is associated with that viewpoint. The material world, if the material world is it and it's just there, then the ethic is that in a materialist world, a person tries to control the environment to suit them. It's there. The material is just there for you to use and for you to control for your own benefit. So if you're too cold, then you can make heat. If you're too hot, you can make cold. It's that sort of thing. So the concept is that you use your resources to control what's outside of you. And that's the natural ethic of a materialist reality. Okay, now what that means is what's outside of you is also not just the environment, but it's other people. So you control what's outside of you, other people, the resources of the earth, but also of people, and you control those, try to manipulate them for your own betterment. So it develops a control, power, force ethic, where everybody's trying to create something better for themselves. It's a very self-centered ethic. And when you live in that kind of a reality, or where most of the people in the reality believe that that's the kind of reality that we have, then people interact with each other with the ethic of control, power, and force. That's the nature of a materialist or physicalist reality. Now, in the reality where consciousness, is fundamental, this reality is virtual, and that the drive of the system is toward love, and I can show that, that sounds like you make that up, but I can show that as a logical and necessary conclusion. It just would take me longer than this little video is worth. But that what drives it is to lower entropy states. Those lower entropy states can be equated in a social system with caring, cooperation, and love. So when you have a reality based on this being a virtual reality and conscious being a computer, it also has an ethic. And the ethic is caring, helping. What can I give, not what can I get? How can I help, not what's in it for me? Love. So that's what difference it will make. It will change the whole ethic of our viewpoint of the world, of what reality is all about. If we can change that ethic, then all the rest of our problems will solve themselves. That's the source of all of our problems. All of the problems that we see we have with, a dictator being nasty to people, politicians not telling the truth, et cetera, banks charging fees for nothing actually contributed. All of this is a symptom. The symptom is not the problem. The problem is that our ethic in this culture is control, power, force. When that gets replaced by a love, caring, and cooperation, all of that unpleasantness will go away. So what difference does it make? All the difference in the world. It would change everything.